2001 Space Odyssey. Stanley Kubrick and Arthur C. Clarke simultaneously created both the film and novel of 2001 A Space Odyssey, yet they told fundamentally different versions of the same story. The collaboration began in the mid-1960s, with Clarke writing the novel while Kubrick developed the screenplay in parallel. The film released before the book's publication in 1968, creating an unusual reverse-order adaptation. One major change involved the primary destination. Saturn appeared in the novel, but special effects coordinator Douglas Trumbull couldn't achieve convincing Saturn rings on film, forcing Kubrick to change the location to Jupiter. HAL 9000's prediction error was handled differently in each version. The book portrayed it as a respectful discussion, while the film depicted a secret conspiracy. Clarke provided clearer explanations of the monolith and Stargate concepts in his novel, but Kubrick deliberately minimized dialogue and made the film cryptic, calling it basically a visual, non-verbal experience. This represents one of cinema's most unusual adaptations, because both creator and director actively shaped both mediums simultaneously, demonstrating how the same story can communicate profoundly differently depending on its format. Blade Runner. Philip K. Dick's 1968 novel, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep?, underwent drastic revisions when Ridley Scott adapted it into the 1982 neo-noir masterpiece, Blade Runner. Film rights were first optioned in the mid-1970s by producer Herb Jaffe, and Dick strongly rejected that early screenplay, before Ridley Scott's later version moved forward. Dick's wife character, Iran, was completely removed from the film, fundamentally changing Deckard's motivation and isolation. In the book, Iran motivates Deckard to earn money for a live animal, but the film removes this emotional anchor entirely. Dick's Deckard was described as bald and fat and old, while the film's version is lean and younger, played by Harrison Ford. The film introduces ambiguity about Deckard's potential android nature, something less present in the source material. The film removes the novel's more complex multi-agency police subplot, simplifying everything into a single Blade Runner unit. The theatrical version included a studio-imposed happy ending, absent from Dick's work, though the 1992 director's cut restored nuance by adding the unicorn dream sequence and removing Deckard's voiceover. Though initially a commercial failure, the film became influential precisely because it diverged from the source material, proving that sometimes a film's power lies in what adaptations change rather than what they preserve. The Martian. Andy Weir self-published his novel about Mark Watney's Mars survival in 2011, before it became a 2015 Ridley Scott film that streamlined the story's complexity for cinematic pacing. Weir originally published the novel online in serialized format before securing a traditional book deal. The film removed a major sandstorm subplot that dominates the late novel plot. The book alternates between Watney's logs and events on Earth, while Goddard's screenplay streamlines those shifts into an even more straightforward, continuously forward-moving narrative. The movie visually emphasizes Watney's injuries, with close-up shots that feel more graphic than the novel's more clinical descriptions. The film also adds an Earth epilogue, showing Watney as an instructor, while the book ends at the rescue. Matt Damon's casting was approved by Weir, as matching his character visualization. Goddard significantly condensed the several hundred-page novel into a focused screenplay. Weir expressed satisfaction with the adaptation, praising Scott's beautiful, sweeping panoramic vistas that were impossible to achieve in prose. The adaptation succeeds because Goddard made intelligent cuts rather than slavishly faithful inclusions, prioritizing momentum and spectacle over comprehensive detail. Foundation. Isaac Asimov's 70-year-old Foundation book series originally consisted of interconnected novellas spanning centuries, requiring fundamental restructuring for Apple TV Plus's 2021 series. The source material comprises short stories rather than a linear narrative, with Asimov's books spanning multiple centuries featuring different character generations. Showrunner David Goyer reorganized the timeline, mixing novels chronologically to create coherent television drama. He created an entirely new concept, the Clone Dynasty, featuring the Cleon characters, inspired by brief mentions in the books. Gal Dornick and Salvor Hardin were gender-swapped from male characters in the original stories. Hari Seldon's role was expanded significantly, with him appearing posthumously as an artificial intelligence in the show. Goyer added diverse casting and emotional character focus absent from the concept-heavy source material. The series was renewed for Season 3, continuing to expand beyond Asimov's published work. Goyer has said the key was rooting the series in emotion and character rather than just mathematics. This adaptation proves that some beloved source material simply cannot translate directly to visual media without fundamental restructuring. Neuromancer Development. William Gibson's 1984 cyberpunk novel, Neuromancer, has been trapped in development hell for 4 decades before finally becoming a 10-episode Apple TV Plus series, greenlit in 2024. Gibson optioned the rights in 1986 to Cabana Boy Productions, a small company founded by 2 surfers and their family. In the late 1980s, Timothy Leary became involved with Neuromancer as a creative force behind a computer game adaptation, working with rights that had been licensed from Cabana Boy Productions. An unproduced Neuromancer screenplay was written in the late 1980s. In 2017, Tim Miller, the Deadpool director, attempted a Fox adaptation that also failed. The project was finally greenlit as an Apple TV Plus series in February 2024. Graham Rowland and J.D. Dillard created the 10-episode series order. Filming began in January 2025 in Tokyo, with a cast including Callum Turner and Brianna Middleton. The 38-year journey from options to actual production exemplifies Hollywood's difficulty adapting complex cyberpunk literature, with the source material's dense world-building and technical terminology resisting traditional narrative structure. Fahrenheit 451. François Truffaut's 1966 adaptation of Ray Bradbury's dystopian novel stands as one of cinema's most troubled adaptations, hampered by linguistic barriers that Truffaut himself considered his saddest filmmaking experience. Truffaut spoke virtually no English, but agreed to direct for Universal's first European production. The entire production was conducted in French, with final dialogue translated awkwardly into English. Truffaut actually preferred the French dubbed version over the English original. The adaptation added a romantic relationship between Montag and Clarice, entirely absent from the novel. Julie Christie was cast in a dual role, playing both Montag's wife and Clarice, representing 2 opposing ideologies. Clarice survives in the film, whereas she dies in a hit-and-run in the book. The budget was $1.5 million, with filming at Pinewood Studios. The final Book People scene was filmed in an unexpected snowstorm on Julie Christie's birthday. The film demonstrates that adaptation success requires more than artistic vision, as practical production constraints matter enormously. Yet Christie's dual-role casting created thematic depth accidentally, with the characters becoming abstract representations of conformity versus individualism, rather than traditional hero-villain dichotomy. Clockwork Orange. Stanley Kubrick's 1971 film adaptation of Anthony Burgess's 1962 novel ends with Alex fantasizing about violence. But Burgess originally wrote a redemptive final chapter that was removed from the American illusion of one of cinema's most influential films. By the way, if you're enjoying this, I create videos like this all the time. I'd appreciate if you subscribed. Total Recall. Paul Verhoeven's 1990 Total Recall shares its first half faithfully with Philip K. Dick's 1966 short story We Can Remember It For You Wholesale, then diverges so completely that the climaxes resolve opposite narrative outcomes. Dick's original story was a 7,000-word short story published in 1966. Both versions begin identically, with Douglas Quayle visiting the Recall Memory Implant Company. The first major divergence occurs when the film adds Mars military action sequences entirely absent from the story. The story's wife merely abandons Quayle when his identity is returned, but the film's wife becomes an attempted murderer. Verhoeven adds a Mars rescue sequence, alien conspiracies, and action heroics for the climax. Dick's story ends with Quayle returning to Recall, seeking new memory replacement, rather than continuing a Mars adventure. The original ending features an implanted memory of fantasy life to prevent assassination, creating ironic and darkly comic resolution. Verhoeven's ending provides triumph on Mars with romantic resolution. This represents adaptation as creative invention rather than translation, with Verhoeven transforming Dick's introspective puzzle box story into action spectacle, while both versions ultimately ask the same question about distinguishing implanted memory from lived experience. Ender's Game. Orson Scott Card's 1985 novel spent 28 years in development hell before Gavin Hood's 2013 adaptation materialized. But the film sacrificed the book's psychological complexity for streamlined action plotting. The novel was published in 1985, with first film options acquired in 2003. David Benioff and D.B. Weiss wrote an early screenplay with director Wolfgang Peterson attached. Hood took over in 2010, attempting to fuse Ender's Game and Ender's Shadow novels. The film removes the entire Peter and Valentine subplot central to the book's thematic core. In the novel, Ender's violence stems from internal conflict between Peter's ruthlessness and Valentine's empathy. Peter and Valentine barely appear in the film version, reducing Ender's motivation complexity dramatically. Battle school training montages are truncated, lacking the accumulative psychological wear shown in the novel. Internal monologue was eliminated, with external exposition substituted instead. The book's central question, who is Ender becoming, becomes merely, can Ender win, in the adaptation. Card's genius lies in unspooling psychological crisis through internal monologue, something film struggles to convey without clunky voiceover. The film's failure stems not from artistic incompetence, but from medium mismatch, demonstrating that some narratives are fundamentally literature-dependent. Time Machine. H.G. Wells's 1895 novella has been adapted twice, with 1960 and 2002 versions each reimagining the time traveler's motivation entirely differently. The original novella features an unnamed time traveler driven by scientific curiosity about the future. The 1960 film adaptation by George Powell renamed the protagonist George Wells, presenting him as a science-inspired utopian. This version won an Academy Award for special effects, showing time-lapse world changes. The 1960 plots remained relatively faithful to Wells's Eloy and Morlock society structure. The 2002 films, directed by Simon Wells, H.G. Wells's great-grandson, completely restructured the motivation. This version features Alexander Hartigan, driven by personal tragedy after his fiance's murder. The 2002 adaptations added an artificial intelligence hologram guide, absent in both the source and 1960 version. The destruction method changed from nuclear war to moon colonization disaster. The two adaptations reveal how identical source material can yield opposite interpretations across eras, with the 1960 version embracing Wells's optimistic scientific humanism, while the 2002 version prioritized personal trauma narrative, reflecting contemporary Hollywood's emphasis on emotional motivation over philosophical inquiry. Minority Report. Steven Spielberg's 2002 Minority Report loosely adapts Philip K. Dick's 1956 novella by deconstructing the protagonist into two separate characters. Dick's original John Anderton was described as bald, fat, and old at the story's opening. Dick's Anderton feels insecure about replacement by younger assistant Ed Whitwer. The film splits Anderton into two characters, a young hero played by Tom Cruise and aging founder Lamar Burgess, played by Max von Sydow. Spielberg's Cruise Anderton is athletic, sympathetic, and wrongly accused. The adaptation added a subplot about Anderton's kidnapped son, completely absent from Dick's story. A neuro-leptin drug addiction motivation was also added. The film's Whitwer survives and inherits the job, while Dick's Whitwer takes the position after Anderton's exile. An antagonist plot involving Burgess murdering Anne Lively was created specifically for the film. Spielberg's choice to split Anderton into two characters solved a fundamental casting problem, as casting a bald, fat, old protagonist in an action thriller would be commercially challenging. This choice expanded runtime, but also broadened the story's thematic scope beyond Dick's tight novella about free will to a larger story about institutional corruption. Starship Troopers. Paul Verhoeven's 1997 Starship Troopers deliberately inverts Robert Heinlein's 1959 novel's reverence for military service, transforming earnest militarism into scathing satire of fascism and war propaganda. Heinlein's novel celebrated military culture, citizenship through service, and emphasized powered armor technology. Verhoeven's background as a Dutch director who lived through World War II civilian bombardment shaped his critical perspective. The film removes the powered armor technology emphasis central to Heinlein's military vision. Verhoeven adds graphic violence depicting soldiers ripped to shreds in training and combat. The film's propaganda newsreels parody 1940s militaristic media manipulation. Johnny Rico is passive and manipulated in the film, whereas he makes active decisions in the novel. An iconic scene shows troops celebrating the phrase, "You can't make an omelet without breaking eggs." The film presents the military as absurd and wasteful, while the novel portrays it as heroic and necessary. This adaptation represents reinterpretation rather than transcription, with Verhoeven capturing Heinlein's narrative while critiquing his values. The film maintains surface fidelity while completely reversing meaning, demonstrating that faithful adaptation requires preserving story, but not necessarily authorial philosophy. Earth Stood Still. Robert Wise's 1951 The Day the Earth Stood Still expanded Harry Bates's brief 1940 short story Farewell to the Master into a 92-minute meditation on Cold War fears and international diplomacy that transcended its source material's scope. Bates's novella was a brief story ending with Klaatu's assassination by sniper. The original concept involved a flying saucer landing, an alien being shot, and a robot retaliating. Oscar-winning screenwriter Edmund H. North dramatically expanded the scope. Added character development includes Klaatu's boarding house stay and relationship with widow Helen. An iconic plot addition shows Klaatu immobilizing all electricity worldwide for 30 minutes, something not in the source material. The famous dialogue, prologue, Klaatu Barada Nikto, was added for the film. Bernard Herrmann's theremin-based score was completely original to the adaptation. The film's reflection on nuclear war anxiety is more developed than the brief novella. This adaptation proves that films can surpass source material by expanding thematically rather than merely translating. Wise and North took Bates's 15-minute story concept and extracted philosophical dimensions about peace, international cooperation, and atomic anxiety that a brief tale couldn't accommodate. Arrival. Denis Villeneuve's 2016 Arrival expands Ted Chiang's intricate 1998 novella Story of Your Life into a 2-hour emotional narrative that restructures the source material's temporal architecture. Chiang's novella is a 30-page, complex exploration of language, time, and memory. The film introduces interspecies diplomacy crisis and military conflict tension absent from the story. In the story, aliens depart mysteriously, but the film reveals their arrival purpose as seeking future reciprocal help. The novella's flash-forward as flashback structure was maintained in the film, but more explicitly revealed. The film changes the daughter's death from a mountain climbing accident in the novella to cancer. Romance with Ian is emphasized as central plot, while the novella focuses more on the daughter relationship. Screenwriter Eric Heiserer wrote the spec script over years, fighting to get the project greenlit. The film was nominated for 8 Academy Awards and won the Ray Bradbury Award for Dramatic Adaptation. Villeneuve transformed Chiang's primarily intellectual and introspective work into emotional science fiction by emphasizing Louise and Ian's relationship and adding geopolitical stake. The film translates philosophical concepts into emotional experiences while serving Chiang's core theme about how language and temporal perception shape human connection. Altered Carbon. Netflix's Altered Carbon, which ran from 2018 to 2020, adapted Richard K. Morgan's 2002 cyberpunk novel by expanding character backstories while maintaining the series' core concept of consciousness transfer technology. Morgan's novel is a dark, complex noir featuring Takeshi Kovacs, a soldier-turned-investigator. The series was created by Leda Kalogridis, co-writer of Avatar and Terminator Genesis. The first season contained 10 episodes spreading novella-length plot across 5+ hours. An added character named Poe, an artificial intelligence, was praised as a successful original addition. Modified backstory elements drew criticism from hardcore fans who noticed deviation from plot specifics. The adaptation added romantic subplots not emphasized in the novel. An anime prequel film was created in 2020, expanding the universe. The series was canceled after 2 seasons despite critical acclaim. The mixed reception reveals Adaptation's risk calculus, with the series making intelligent decisions expanding a tightly plotted novel into episodic format and adding emotional dimensions, yet alienating readers wanting literal faithfulness. The Poe character demonstrates that successful additions can emerge from thoughtful expansion rather than mere padding, though budget versus viewership mismatch ultimately drove cancellation rather than adaptation quality concerns. If you found this valuable, subscribe so you never miss new content. Thanks for watching.